Taking it forward after a wonderful presentation of that sort, which is both entertaining as well as insightful, is going to be difficult, especially since we're also running against the clock. So, lady and gentlemen, the challenge for us, of course, is to try and take as many questions as possible. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick off the discussion. Now, David has done an excellent job in bringing out a number of parts of the code. He's talked about renewal, he's talked about remuneration, independence, conflict of interest, ending off that bit. We'll try to move on from there. One of the topics that we hope to bring up, of course, is on the idea of risk management. Now that, of course, is very important from your perspective as either board members or people who are very involved in charities. I just wonder from your perspective, though, do you think charities are doing enough in the area of risk management? Maybe we'll start with Chairman of the Charity Council for a thought, and then we'll go around the block. Gerard.
Well, I think certainly charities are just beginning to understand the topic of risk management. It's not traditional for one to pay attention to this. Most charities, they do their work out with a good heart, and they assume that everyone will play ball to the charities, but those of us who have been involved with charities for decades, especially some of the charitable works, building works for various missions, it is not beyond contractors taking advantage of the missions. They have this attitude, because it's a religious organization, it's unlikely they're going to sue us. So even if something goes wrong, they're very forgiving, that sort of things. So over the last few decades, I've seen a lot of abuses from the commercial sector. So things can go wrong. But in the context of today's operations, the public itself is very demanding and very quick to lay blame. So if you're running a childcare or something to do with children and you don't have a robust system to vet the people you hire, and accidentally hire someone with a previous record of child abuse, and something happens in your childcare, you'll be taken to task for not having anticipated this type of risk. So this is something new, and really charities need to pay more attention. A lot of things can go wrong, but let me warn you, you should never adopt a mentality of being risk adverse. There's some risks you have to live with. It's just a matter of knowing they exist and think of what you can do to mitigate it. The worst thing you can do is to avoid all risks. It's just not possible. Yeah.
Eunice, what are your thoughts on this issue of risk management?
Well, risk is actually, a very broad area. A lot of charities, and I say this from the side, the perspective of, say, a fundraiser. All charities raise funds, right? And again, I think this is where your transparency is very important. And maybe if I give you an example, well, you raise funds and you have an activity and it comes with costs and expenses. How transparent are you? Because if you're not transparent and if you don't keep your costs well managed, then there is the risk of your reputation, of loss of trust, all right? And loss of trust not just from the donors, but from the public. And it affects all areas, even when you recruit staff, or when you invite people to be on your board, all this will be impacted. And I think it's very important. So it covers many areas, perhaps too many for us to cover in one conference session. But certainly, in fundraising practices, it's very important.
Okay, we'll come to the fundraising bit in a second. Let me just not skip David, but bring Woon into the picture for the moment on the risk management issue, and then we'll get back to David.
I think it's an issue, actually. Why? In particular, the operational risk management part. A lot of charities rely on volunteers. Some also rely on outsourced service provider. So you can have volunteers preparing food, bring in, right? And then later on, you have people who is participating in the event, reporting to hospital for diarrhea. This has happened, and I think this aspect of operational risk management, many charities gloss over it, and I think it is important. Safety aspect, right? You create an event, you have tentage. What happens if the tentage collapses? or you lay wires, they are not protected. There's no such proof. So increasingly we are seeing that people are glossing over this kind of safety details, and it's an issue.
Yeah. David, you want to come in on the risk management
Sure.
point?
Actually, to me, the biggest risk with risk management is that the biggest risk with risk management is that we go for form rather than substance. Okay. I think we need to be realistic as charities. It's new for us. What I would encourage you to begin with is going to be form. So you need to develop a risk management framework. You need to be able to categorize your risk between, whether it's high impact, low impact, moderate, how frequently, etc. And you come up with a heat map, etc. Initially, it's form. But very quickly, you need it to move into substance. Okay? Now, they're not necessarily going to be big risks. But what is the substance in a risk management framework? Well, I think you need to identify the key things. It could be WHS, as Woon Teck has said, workplace health and safety, risk to your reputation, okay? Stakeholders' interests, bunch of these, you list them out. Now, most of our charities are not in real-time type situations. And for the board to look at it, say twice a year, is probably adequate. But the framework should serve as a checklist to the board members so that they know management is adequately addressing each one of these and that we don't neglect them. Okay, so you can picture the situation. You look at this list of risks, if you like, and what are the mitigating measures against the risk, and you look at it every 6 months, all right, and just make sure that things are in place and not drifting. Okay, and then you begin to feel the substance of a risk management framework.
Well, let's move beyond risk management. So one of the issues that David brought up earlier was, of course, potential conflicts of interest or even clear cases of conflict of interest. Gerard and Eunice, I'll bring you into the picture for this one. So in a charity, there are relationships between the board members, with the staff, with the volunteers. I mean, it's very much of an ecosystem. How do you think these relationships ought to be better managed so that there are, where there are conflicts of interest, perhaps to reduce them, or at least to be able to manage those situations in the course of the work of the charities? Gerard.
No, I think as David has pointed out, it is not a question of avoiding all conflict of interest. Just like risk, you can't avoid all risk. You need to have a proper system in place so that people will know how to behave. So if you are involved in the decision making, potentially where there's conflict interest arise, the standard operating procedure should be such that you recuse yourself. In some cases, you even leave the room and let the rest of the board members discuss and make a decision. So, as David pointed out again, there are some clear advantage in working with people that you know, and therefore potentially a conflict of interest. But there are protocols, there are processes that you can put into place to avoid it from being an issue. So bottom line, you develop the system and then you document it and have transparency.
Okay, Eunice.
Well, declaration is one important part that's very important. All right, and this should be an exercise that you carry periodically to ensure that the declaration of conflict of interest is updated. All right, not just for the board, but also for the staff in the charities. That's important because many of us could be related to people who run businesses that become our vendors. So that's important, declaration. And the other side of it is, on the part of, say, do staff become board members? I think in some charities, you have this situation. Then I would say that then the clarity of roles is important. What is your role as a board member, and what is your role as, say, the ED or the CEO of the organization? I think that clarity is important. And all this should be, it's not something that you write happily and say, no, I know where it is. It is very easy to blur the lines. But I think if you are very clear and the board allows such a situation to exist, then I think that's fine.
Okay, I'm going to...
I think before you move
yes.
on, a lot of these things are subjected to perceptions. Because a lot of members of the public and other, even people just observing, don't have access to the full facts. So very often it is a perception they hear a little bit of story and they perceive that something is wrong, there's a conflict of interest, there's some wrongdoing. So the only thing that can combat it is transparency. Disclose it. So there's nothing for people to gossip about. There's nothing for people to get distort. Have full transparency, and you will end all this rumor mongering and twisted facts from arising.
Melvin, one
Teck, come
point
on
of
in.
clarification which I think I would like to make here is the private sector code of corporate governance did not prevent conflict of interest situation. Actually, if you look at what is happening at the listed board, there are many situations where there are conflict of interest exists, and the listing manual has a chapter called Chapter 9, Interested Person Transactions. These are very clear procedures, how you should disclose it, when you should get the shareholders' approval. So I agree with David that we should really examine the current code, right? In particular, the word prevent, because you can't.
Okay, some people from the audience might have seen me sort of being very distracted, shuffling a lot of papers. The reason for that is, of course, we have a whole host of questions. And I think, folks, we've got about 19 minutes on the clock. I think we want to try to get to some of these questions which are extremely relevant. So I'm going to try to, I should say we have got more questions than we have time for. So we'll try to feed as many as we can. So first question is really about the issue of remuneration. So David, this is a question to you, but I welcome thoughts from the others as well. It's the first time I'm reading this. I try to read it as best as I can, but it is about the disclosure of staff remuneration. So the question here is, can you provide some clarity on it? If, in the case of this charity, their top 3 earning staff is a board member, what kind of disclosure do they have to make in the annual report? That's the first bit. And number 2, do they need to name that board member of the staff? And of course, to disclose the exact salary or salary band. David.
So the answer is yes to all of them, all right?
That's a short answer.
Well,
would you elaborate?
I mean, if you're a staff member and on the board, all right, firstly, it's likely that you're going to be one of the top 3, right? It's unlikely you're going to be paid less. Anyhow, if you're one of the top 3, then you have to be disclosed as within the bands as one of those, whether it's 100,000, 200,000, 200,000, and 300,000. But under the board member section, also your name has to appear with the exact remuneration that you get. Okay, so you're actually covered by both sides.
Yeah, I think David is absolutely right, because generally board members are not paid. So the 3 staff that are sitting on the board would be the only 3 that are being paid. So they'll be the highest earners on the board. There's no escaping that. But again, I think all these things you must take in the context that it doesn't say you cannot do it, but you need to disclose. So I know people get very excited. Like recently, we for this year, there was this directory for all charities that you have to disclose money dispersed overseas by the end of this year, all the sums paid for overseas activities and so forth. I got quite a few people who rang me out and said, you mean I cannot do it anymore? I said, no, it doesn't mean you cannot do it, but you have to disclose. You have to keep good records of it, and at the end of it, just disclose all the payments that you have made overseas. So don't misinterpret it. None of this is intended to bind your hands to say you can't do this, you can't do that, but disclose.
Okay, in the spirit of disclosure, obviously the next question is quite interesting because it is about the code. So this is in relation to the expectations of board members. So the question here is, has the code increasingly placed more expectations on board members to play an active role in ensuring that the charity is properly managed? And how will the Charity Council assist the charities in board renewal and succession planning when it becomes a bit more onerous for people to serve for free? I think that's what I'm trying to sort of cut down on the question.
No,
Gerard,
I think David made it very clear that the Code of Governance actually facilitate and aid board members. With or without the Code of Governance, you already have that responsibility as a board member. And people forget that. There is no concept of a sleeping director. If you are a director, you are a director. You are on the board, you are on the board. And what comes along to being on the board is accountability and responsibility over the organization for which you as a board is providing the oversight. Then, without the code, you don't know what to do. The code actually gives the clarity and guide you and help you to carry out your duties. It doesn't add a burden to you. It actually lightens your burden.
Eunice, your perspective.
Well, for us, I've never had this problem about the board. All right, and I think the terms, the tenure, all this is important. If you have that documented, then that helps you with your board renewal and succession. That's a bit tricky actually, because it is very challenging to get good board members on your board. It's quite challenging, all right, because there are so many people that you may think they would give a good balance in your board composition, but when you approach them, they could be very busy. But then that is not to say it cannot be done, right? Through the network of your board, through your organization, you can always approach them. And of course, I think right now there are other avenues too that you can invite board members. Now, if you have, say, a document for us, we have an operating rules and guidelines on how we want our board to be formed. All right, then I think it makes things easier, right? And well, I think it's a very wide area. I can't cover everything. Perhaps my colleagues over here can better, because I don't really have a problem with
Not
this.
a worry. Woon, you want to jump in on a quick thought? Because David, you've got a few questions coming up, so just heads up first.
In terms of board renewal, the tendency is many founders feel that they cannot find someone that understands how to run these charities better than him or her. And I think that is the start of all the lack of effort to put together a coherent plan to do board renewals. And that is something that I think the charities have to self-regulate and think about it. And certainly my view is never the job of the charities you need to go and tell you what to do. This is a code that actually promotes self-regulation. And I think the more we think of this from a self-regulation perspective, the better for us. We certainly don't wish the regulator to come and dictate. Like the regulation should always be the last. And in the words of Walter Woon, the Auditors General, he said that the first line of defense Attorney General. That's right. The first line of defense must be self-regulation. Second line of defense must be the public, right? Then finally the regulator. So don't always look at the regulator.
Okay, talking about the regulator, but anyway, this is the question for David. It's a bit complicated, so let me just read it. Do you think that there should be a different consideration for privately funded charities with regard to the code of governance? For charities, I assume. For instance, if the charity is established by a corporate donor and then funded solely by the corporate donor, the donor should have the prerogative to establish governance standards for the charity.
Sure, I suppose if you're a donor and you set up your own private charity, I mean, what you do with it in a sense is your own. But it depends on what that charity is done. I mean, when people set up their own foundations, their own trusts, etc., it can be for various reasons, okay? Sometimes there's estate planning involved. So it's a little complicated. But it's true, the stakeholders, the primary stakeholders are only the family involved, okay? But I think if I was invited, for example, to join the board of one of those foundations, okay, I would have to be mindful of the fact that in fact it's a privately run setup, but I would try to see which elements of the code would still help that fund, charity, foundation operate more effectively. Okay, I would try and see which parts of the code make sense for that. See, in the end, our code is guidelines. Okay, they are guidelines. And I think it's for board members to try and see how best to apply the code to the situation in which you are serving. So I would say, yes, there are going to be differences, as with any charity. But again, look at the code in relation to the objects of the charity, the fund, the foundation, okay, and the situation in which it operates.
I would quickly chip in. If it's nothing more than a grant maker, someone who is very rich set a sum of money and then form a charity to dish out money, I think less of a concern, but there's still a more efficient way of doing it. I would immediately worry about someone with lots of money and set up a charity to do charitable works, because there is a relationship that is going to be established with potential beneficiaries. Is it properly run? Are the beneficiaries treated the right way? There is a certain accountability, even though it's your own money. So once you start establishing relationship, who looks at this? You cannot say, oh, because it's private funded, so nobody cares. So you can run a home, you take in orphans, and you abuse the orphans. Then what? And in this day and age, you could be involved in activities that are not quite in line with national interests and all this. Should we not bother because it's privately funded? So I think it depends. If it's just a grant maker and you give out the money, that's one thing. But if you're establishing a relationship itself, looking after it, then there must be some oversight provided over it.
Yeah, I think there are also potential money laundering considerations.
Yeah.
It's not that you're free of regulation just because it's your own money.
Yeah. So that's a good segue to one of these questions that I've been sitting on, and I'm trying to paraphrase this as well. So this is in relation to, obviously, you spoke about, Gerard spoke about how the donor has got certain duties and so on. So here's the question. This charity board says that its members, the board members are not volunteers, but mainly appointed by the main grantor, and I suppose that's a donor. And some of them are the donors, with some of them being the donor's senior staff. So I assume that this could be a corporate donor of sorts. So they're not sure about whether these individuals who are serving the board are fully aware of their fiduciary duties as board members. And the question here is, how do they equip these board members and make sure that they are fully aware of these duties and what they need to discharge in relation to the charity sector? Anyone would like to jump
Eunice
in?
is the best person to answer this.
Yes.
Well done.
Hey, I think you guys are always giving me the difficult questions that I'm less prepared for. Okay, this is certainly a bit unusual, all right. Normally as a practice, you do not get your donors to be on the board because your donors give you money and the broad intent of what it is given for should be carried out, all right, in the course of, to support the cause. But I guess some of this could have come about because they are thinking, the donors are giving us this huge sum and therefore they should have a say on the board. But actually, I think it does border a little bit on the conflict of interest. Because firstly, I think the composition could be, because I haven't been in one, I haven't seen one, but I'm just looking at the principles and trying to apply this. And if these are, say, all the senior staff, and they are only looking at only one aspect, that is not to say they may not have the skills, that's quite separate. But when they do this, then, you may have other donors who come in, right? And, when it is very, I call it one-sided, where a board is made up of mainly your donors or people that your donors, then I think that's a certain I call it conflict of interest, if I can even describe, although that term is not the best way to describe it. Then how would I deal with it? Let's just say this. introduce other members in. Document, how you're going to, what a board composition should be. And of course, the other part is you're educating your board to the fiduciary duties. I think that's one way of going around and, mitigating it and ensuring that, other donors and also beneficiaries, because that's also important, because your direction could be colored because your board members comprise mainly of staff, senior staff from one area who could be looking at causes closer to their hearts. And that's not, perhaps it can be not quite in keeping with the cause, all right, of the charity.
Not enough diversity to
yes,
help
not
with the
enough
work of the
diversity,
charity.
that's right.
David.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very tough question, and I did ask for it. I'm guessing, all right, because I couldn't. I'm guessing that, for example, it's a situation where, let's say it's a university, it's got a lot of money, it's an endowment fund, so it sets up a fund, so there's a board, and so it appoints the senior members of the staff to be the members of the board, right? So what is your role if you're one of that senior staff appointed to the board? Do you just do what you're told, all right? Or do you have responsibilities? Well, I think my view is that you still have responsibilities, a fiduciary responsibility as a board member on that fund, foundation, or whatever is set up. It is true in another capacity, you're a member of you're a senior member of the staff of the parent institution, if you like. Now, there are various reasons why these things are set up. The setup has to be cleared, obviously, by your auditors. Okay, the lawyers will have a good look at it. But nonetheless, I think if you have been appointed, you're a senior staff member appointed to the board, you have a right. I think there was a training aspect asked there, right? I think if you feel inadequate for the task, it is good to ask for training. I think it's legitimate. You should fully understand your duties as a director on that charity, foundation, etc. And you do need to discharge that separately from your staff functions, is what I would say.
So one last question, a very quick reply from everyone is the question that's just been given to me. So it's relating to what David said. Whose job is it to educate the board of a charity?
No,
Gerard.
I think every individual must understand the role of a board member, and what comes with it is responsibility and accountability. So I'll quickly put in something that over the years it always irritates me, and I've seen enough situation. Now you join a charity as a board member, you don't like what you see is happening there. You resign, walk away, and pretend nothing is wrong. Someone else comes in, join the charity, also doesn't like what he or she sees, resign and walk away and pretend nothing has gone wrong. In my opinion, once you have joined the board and you are a witness to wrongdoing or things that's not right, resigning or walking away doesn't excuse your part of the guilt. I think you have the responsibility to act on it once you accept being a board member.
Okay, Woon, take quick reply.
You see, public trust is a very precious asset, and it is also very fragile. And my view is it's everybody's job to educate the board, and it starts with the code. And that's the reason why you come up with a code. And the code wants to promote self-regulation, right? The second thing I want to say, I just want to add on to this is, yes, we have seen situations where big donors are invited to sit on the board because they are big donors and they can draw funds. But seriously, the board is a key institution that governs the activities. Right? If you really want to do that, you should have a patron, a board of patron. So you solve the problem. And I think all of us have to recognize there's a difference when you are a board member versus when you're appointed as a patron.
Eunice.
Well, again, we are back to this board. Now, whose responsibility is it to orientate the board? Not just the ED or the CEO or the management, but also the board themselves. The chairperson must ensure, all right, that the board, all right, takes an active role in this. And if I take the second part of what Mr. E has said, Gerard here has said, about people who join a board and when they find that it is not their cup of tea and they're not happy with...
Not the cup of tea. When they see something that is not right.
I'm sorry. Yeah, something is not right, all right? The behavior, the conduct, the whatever is going on, okay? They are not comfortable, if that's the word to use, and they leave. I say that is very irresponsible.
Yeah.
Because when you're appointed there and you join a board, it is a responsibility, all right, for you yourself. When you say yes, then you get up there and do what you have to do. If you see a wrong, take steps to correct that. I think that's important. Yeah?
Okay, in a way, Eunice and Gerard have both kindly sold an afternoon session that I'm going to be moderating on whistleblowing. So we'll come to that in a second. David, the clock is glaring at us. One last point on this bit about who educates the board.
I think the education has been adequately addressed. Personally, for myself, I feel it's my responsibility to make sure I know what I need to know. Yes. But I just want to close by coming back to the code, okay, and why it's so important. We've talked about this code. It helps us improve standards of governance. Why? It's because of sustainability, all right? Sustainability of our charity. But I want to make this point. Often when we talk about sustainability, we think about funding. Do I have enough money? Are the reserves there? Can I keep going? But I would encourage you all to think about the sustainability of your charities in terms of trust. Actually, this is the word that Woon Teck used. It's the bank of trust that you have with the public, the regulators, your stakeholders, okay? And actually, that's what the code is about, all right? Helping charities, boards in particular, build this bank of trust. And it's this bank of trust that will keep you going more than your financial reserves, okay?
Okay, on that kind note, ladies and gentlemen, if you join me to thank David, Woon Teck, Eunice, and Gerard for their great views. Thank you very much.